You're watching Toronto Sports Rush on the Bet Rivers Network.
It's McGuire Mondays with Pierre McGuire, Julie Stewart-Binks, and myself, Dan O'Toole. Pierre, Toronto Maple Leafs. I saw a sign in a crowd that said, I don't know if the Leafs even have a website because they can't string 3 W's together.
Ooh! Damn.
They've lost 3 in a row. What's the state of the Toronto Maple Leafs this early in the season? Pierre McGuire.
The power play needs to be better. Dan, nice to visit with you and Julie. The power play clearly needs to be better. Marc Savard was brought in to make that power play better. Guy Boucher moved out. Marc Savard moved in. The power play's not better yet. I think it will be. It's a work in progress. I thought they showed a lot of heart and character in Boston on Saturday night. If you look at it, the last 6 games, 2-3-1, that's not nearly good enough for this team. It's going to be an interesting week for them, at Winnipeg for a huge game on Monday night. And then you're home against Seattle, then back on the road against St. Louis and Minnesota. To me, the biggest thing is special teams, especially power play. There's probably some good vibes around the room now that they got McCabe signed to a long-term extension. I think that he's a very popular player around the team. So that being said, the state of the team is probably not exactly where they thought it would be, Dan, and I think that the power play is clearly a work in progress and is something that needs to be better.
Right. So on that point with the power play, what's maybe an adjustment that you think should be made?
I think usually the top power plays in the league, Julie, when you watch them, they have somebody that the puck always goes through. So whether it's John Tavares, whether it's Mitchell Marner, whether it's, for the sake of argument, Austin Matthews, there's got to be one designated person where that power play starts and you set it off of that person. I'll give you the best power plays that have ever happened. In Pittsburgh back in the early 90s, everything went through Mario Lemieux. When you look at, great power plays of recent years, the Washington Capitals, everything went through Nicholas Backstrom. I think in Toronto, they got to make a decision. Who's the power play going to run through? That would be one adjustment that I would make. They maybe have already decided on that. But to me, you've got 2 choices, really. You've got John Tavares, who's a really creative playmaker, and Mitchell Marner. And you got the gunner in Austin Matthews. So they have to make that decision as a management team and a coaching staff.
Something interesting happened in that overtime loss to the Bruins. In the same week that Jim Montgomery gets caught on camera yelling at Brad Marchand, and Marchand said, no, I don't know why you're putting heat on that guy. I deserve that. Coaches shouldn't get called out for calling a player out. So Austin Matthews goes and does pretty much the same thing that Marchand does, gives it away, creates a turnover, and then the Boston Bruins win it. The benefit for Craig Berube is he could deal with his superstar behind closed doors.
Well said, and I agree. Look, I've stood in both of their shoes, Montgomery's and Berube's, both as an assistant coach and a head coach in the National Hockey League. It's not about milk and cookies at that level. It's really hard, intense stuff. Guys don't really gravitate to milquetoast kind of solutions. They want hard-edged, truthful solutions. And Brad, I thought, handled his situation, Dan, unbelievably well. Berube is he's not a gentle giant behind the bench. He's a tough guy. Trust me on that. I saw him at work. Every single game they played during the Stanley Cup run in 2019 in St. Louis, I broadcast. I was between the benches for every game they played. And I can tell you right now, there are times when he challenges guys. There are guys when he's really intense with them. There are other times when he backs off. The late, great Pat Burns, when he coached in Toronto, was very similar to that. I think one of the things that's happened in the league, we've got a lot of media members that are trying to look for any indiscretion and try to blow it up. And I don't think that's the proper way to do business. I don't think trying to do the media side for just clicks is the right way to do business. Talk to all the parties involved, see where it stands, and then maybe you have a story. But I think that a lot of people are in a rush to judgment in a lot of these media markets now, and it's unfortunate.
Well, on that note, we are only here for clicks, Pierre, so we're going to have to get you out of here. But obviously not. We're here for the integrity of the game. And Jake McCabe, as you mentioned, re-signed to the Toronto Maple Leafs. And talking with just a source ahead of time, said that this is a very team-friendly deal in a way, because if you had waited till July 1st, you could have gotten $5 million for 5 years. Yeah. In what way do you think that maybe seeing a guy like Jake McCabe re-signed, also an American guy who wants to play in the Toronto market and is taking a somewhat team-friendly deal, sort of maybe means to the rest of the guys on the team and the market?
What a great question, and what a great way to look at it, Julie. I completely agree. You know, I've known Jake since he played at the University of Wisconsin, when he's a captain of a world junior team that won gold over in Russia. Phil Halsey was the coach. Jake McCabe, I can tell you right now, he's a player. When I was in Ottawa on the management side, we were really interested in trying to sign. He was just coming off an injury. I give Toronto full marks for, doing a deep dive on the injury, because a lot of people thought it might have been career-ending, a lower body injury. And he's panned out unbelievably well. I think it says a lot about how much pride he has in playing for an original six team. He also did that in Chicago. Says a lot about how much he cherishes being in a hockey market, which is a great hockey market in Toronto. And I think it says a lot about what he thinks the future of the organization is. I think it's a brilliant thing. I think it brings a lot of real positive energy around the group, Julie. And I like the fact that he kind of made it a team-friendly deal. And I can tell you right now, had he gone to market, you're spot on in terms of the dollar value. You are spot on.
Did you ever work for a coaching staff that went to management and said, unless we desperately need to do it, don't re-up anyone, don't do any contract signings mid-season because it's a distraction and I want that guy playing for his contract?
No, I never did. But here's one thing I learned. Back then, Dan, I can tell you this, and I don't know if it's still the same today because there's just so many different moving parts with all these organizations. Everybody stayed in their lane, and it was called the owner owned, the president presided, the manager managed, the coaches coached, and the scouts scouted. That's how it was. I think it's changed a little bit, Dan, over time, because there are just so many moving parts in these organizations. Your point has a lot of merit to it. I'm not sure that it really holds totally today, because there are just so many things. There's 32 teams in the league. When I started coaching the league, there were 24. You put a guy with the potential to go to market, you may lose him, especially an American guy playing in Canada, to Julie's point. So I never have done that. I've never been part of a staff that did that, but I can see the merits of your argument.
Okay, so Pierre, we were talking on the weekend just after the Bruins loss the loss to the Bruins. Bruins loss. Wishful thinking as a disgruntled Leafs fan my entire life. You said shaking the tree. There might be some shaking the tree, which I love that phrase because it's from Succession 2. Tom Wambsgans says it, if anyone is a big Succession fan. But in what way do you maybe think that might still relate to the Leafs? And if so, what would that look like?
Well, I think at some point a manager is going to decide with the coaching staff, hey, you know what, we really like most of the core of our team, but there's some guys that are comfy cozy. And we can see it. There's a reason why, we're below 500 in our last 6 games, 2-3-1. We're 2-3-1 because some guys just aren't bringing the heat. You look at last week, for instance, the loss against New York in Toronto on Saturday night. Then they play a great game against Tampa. Then they go into Columbus. They're not particularly good. Then they play St. Louis at home, and they're not particularly good. They show some character in Boston. So there's peaks and valleys there, and I know it's early in the year. At some point, Julie, I'm going to say it's probably by game 20. At some point, they're probably going to say, you know what, we're really happy with this group, and we're going to stay with it, or we're not as happy. And one of the ways we think we can be happier, we shake the tree and we make sure maybe some guy gets traded out of here and it gets everybody's attention. And I could see that happening at some point if they're not happy after the 20 game mark with this group.
Okay, sorry, Dan, I'm going to interrupt you from asking a question. Is that the American Thanksgiving time? Do you subscribe to that?
Yeah, it's really darn close. Because I think I broke this down with you and Dan earlier. There's 3 components to an NHL season. There's the first part, which is from the start of the year to U.S. Thanksgiving. Then it's U.S. Thanksgiving to right after probably New Year's. And then there is just before the trade deadline, and there's a drag race to the finish. And the reason why there's 3, teams in the first 20 or so games are trying to figure out what kind of team they have, and guys are starting to get up to tempo. And then you got this next time of the year from U.S. Thanksgiving to just after New Year's where people are getting nicked up, teams are showing lack of depth or a ton of depth, and the tempo keeps going up. And then from there to the trade deadline, then you see a whole other league, and it's really, really difficult. So people usually find out by the 20th game, right around U.S. Thanksgiving, whether they're comfortable with their group or not.
And we're in the career-defining moment of the season for the guys who have to decide, are they going back to junior or are they staying here?
Very fair point. And, we're seeing that now. Philadelphia sent a kid down. Obviously, Colorado sent a kid down. And Montreal's got to make a decision on a player, whether they send him back to Europe or not, and Kapanen, because he's not allowed to go back to junior. He's too old, and he can't go to the American Hockey League. It's contractually stipulated for him. So, yeah, there's some decisions that have to be made on that front too, Dan. You're absolutely right.
Okay, so Pierre, we know there's a big game tonight against the Jets, who are undefeated, have an insane lethal power play. And this is also a team that kind of has that narrative when they start the season, when they're like clicking on all cylinders. And I was just reading how the Leafs have, for the last 3 seasons, kind of had a similar start in this sort of way. What do you expect from a team that's got, 3 losses going into Winnipeg that has been rolling?
They're going to have to play it like a playoff game, number one. Number two, depth really matters, and Winnipeg has it right now. They have one of the best depth lines in the league with Nino Niederreiter, Adam Lowry, and Mason Appleton. Those 3 guys are off to an unbelievable start. They've got one of the probably most underrated superstar scorers in the league in Kyle Connor. I don't think he gets nearly enough credit playing in Winnipeg. Their defense is not a lot of big names. It's vastly underrated, and they play with serious tempo, and they move the puck very quickly. It's led by Josh Morrissey. Winnipeg's a tough team to play against. And, they haven't got great crowds there so far this year. They've had a couple, but not great. It'll be sold out tonight. There'll be huge energy in that building. The start really matters for Toronto, just like it does in most playoff games, whomever's playing. So I would say for Toronto, you got to bring almost a playoff mentality to that game. Scotty Arniel, by the way, quietly, he and Ryan Huska in Calgary, I think those 2 guys have probably done as good a job coaching their respective teams as any 2 coaches in the league to date.
You mentioned it should be a sellout, and I feel bad for Jets fans because the spotlight seems to be on them, and if they can sell out the arena, because that's been the focus for the last 2 seasons.
Yeah, you're exactly right, Dan. Ownership's been amazing there. Mr. Chipman in particular, I've known Mark a long time. He's just such a proud Manitoban and Winnipeg resident. And, that I love going there. I used to, Dan and Julie, I got to tell you this. I remember we used to go in there early and we have these great practices. Everybody in those days talked about how great the ice was in Edmonton. The ice was equally great in the old arena in Winnipeg. And we would have these unbelievable practices. And then at one end, you'd always have the Queen's picture. And they didn't have that big netting up back then. And we had one player who will remain nameless. He used to shoot pucks at the end of practice at the Queen's portrait. So I said to him once, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Well, she's not my queen." So I was just like, "Oh, man." I said, "Just please don't hit the portrait. Just don't hit the portrait. Don't hit it." And
Wow.
yeah, it was different times. But you know what? I think Winnipeg's an amazing hockey market. The entire province is so hockey mad. Spent a lot of time there coaching, a lot of time there scouting and recruiting, and I've never had a bad visit there. I never have.
I always, when I talk about a sellout, I was watching one game where Bob Cole was calling a game, and I hung on every word he said, and it was a Habs game. And he says, "It should be a sellout," and it is. Just, that's Bob Cole in a nutshell. I'm like, just shit like that no one else says, and it's Bob Cole, and it's just magnificent because he said it.
Oh, boy, he was so good at his job. And you know what? Neither one of you are old enough to remember the Summit Series, but Bob called that Summit Series on the radio back in the early 70s. I was a kid in grade 3 at Lower Canada College in Montreal, and I just remember watching it on the black and white TV. The late Mrs. Parsons, who was my grade 3 teacher, and Mrs. Kuzno was the grade 4 teacher. They merged the 2 classes. We watched it on a black and white TV, and we listened to Bob Cole on the radio. It was awesome. Bob was so good, and that was really his coming out party as a broadcaster in Canada.
The best.
I love that memory. That's it's so vivid and so particular and so memorable. But Winnipeg was like, I lived there for 4 months only. It was the summer, but I loved it. Went out to Whiskey Dick's like every night. Rest in peace. No, it does not exist anymore. But I was there when the Jets came back. And I remember that. Just like the whole city was just absolutely obsessed, where you could talk to anyone in the entire world and they would know every single thing about the lines, about the power play, about whatever. And it was just because that was, really the only thing kind of going on. So I was kind of surprised that they've been having trouble with the sellouts. Like, I don't know, ticket prices, whatever, but hopefully they get back in there because that's a great atmosphere. And then with the Ducks, seeing them I was there when they had their first game playoff game as the Jets 2.0, and it was deafening, right? Like, you've been down on the sideline. Obviously, Pierre, you can't hear anything. People are insane.
Yeah, no, I did the Western Conference final between Vegas and Winnipeg many moons ago. It was Vegas' first year in the league, and they did the whiteout that game, and it was unbelievable. The whiteout and the noise, it was just tremendous. You talk about going to Whiskey Dick's. The Palomino Club, when I was coaching.
Oh, that's good, too.
Everybody knew everything about the National Hockey League. So after a game, teams didn't charter out in those days. Everybody headed from the Winnipeg Arena right into the Palomino Club. And there were a lot of great hockey stories that were passed around at the Palomino Club.
You mentioned the old arena and when they had the whiteouts, when home teams wore their white jerseys. Why? I don't know why. Or maybe before I get to my question, maybe you can answer that, Pierre. Why don't we do it halfway through the year? You wear your darks on home ice. Then at the second half, we go home white, so we can get back to home white, so the home fans can see both jerseys during the season. Is there a reason we don't do that?
I don't know whether there's a reason or not, Dan, but I can tell you as a kid that grew up worshiping at the altar of the Montreal Canadiens, there were times, obviously where they would switch colors during the year because the fans just desperately wanted to see, the red, white, and blue sweaters, in particular the legendary CH in the red on the red sweater. So they would switch, and then they'd go to the white. And I remember that when I was a kid at the old Forum, but I don't know why they'd do it. I don't know why they wouldn't do it, especially now, Dan and Julie, with the third sweater that's been brought in for a lot of these teams, and even Boston this year, the 100th anniversary of the Bruins. And they're bringing a 100th anniversary sweater into this thing too. So I think your point has some serious merit. I really do.
The reason I was told they always wore the home whites, your whites at home, was because they, if they got dirty, easier to clean at home because you get pucks and stuff off them. So that's why they didn't wear them at the road, because the dark jerseys hid all the scuffs.
That could be true, but I don't think that merits.
It's a laundry issue.
Really has
it's more expensive on the road.
That's right. It was a laundry issue.
Hey, I'll tell you if you want to hear a great story about the late John Ferguson and Bobby Hull, and you could probably find this on YouTube. There was a fight on a Saturday night. Chicago was playing in Montreal, and Bobby Hull and John Ferguson got into it, and John did a number on Bobby. And there was still blood. The next day, I went to the Forum really early. I don't know why. I was fortunate enough to go there. But I went there really early in the morning. I think the junior Canadians were playing in the afternoon. I was a kid. I was maybe 10, 11 years old. I remember it. There was still blood on the ice after the Zamboni had gone over it. It was unbelievable. Wow. And that, I'm going to say that was in the early 70s, whether it was 70, 71, 72. It was right in there. But I will never forget that. And I had a chance to work with the late John Ferguson, and I got to know Bobby Hull really well, obviously, over the years. And both those guys, you look at the size of them and the power of them, I can't even imagine what a fist fight would have been like between the two of them at that time.
So they just get the paint out, I guess? Get rid or just scrape it down to the cement?
Yeah, I don't know, but it was. I'm just telling you, the blood was still there the next morning. I found it unbelievable. I really couldn't believe it.
Oh,
that's pretty badass.
We've now mentioned the Forum, the old Winnipeg Arena, and when I was thinking about the Winnipeg Arena, and speaking of childhood, I always used to love the odd time it happened when the Jets and Oilers met in the postseason, and in the playoffs, they always seemed to have the games were 8-6. Like, this is the Gretzky era, and Don Wittman would always be on the call, and I thought, this is the greatest style of hockey. A goalie makes a save every 10 shots, and it was always Wittman on the call in that arena with the whiteout going on.
Dan, he was phenomenal. Drew, I got to tell you, Don was so good at his job. He was great in the CFL. He was obviously elite at hockey. But what I remember him the most, and I went out to dinner with him a few times. I was doing the advanced scouting for the Pittsburgh Penguins back in the day, and he was doing a lot of playoff games. I remember we went out, and those pipes just brought me back to watching him do Olympics, especially track and field. He was so darn good at it. Don was a legend. And then, I think the curling, Dan, you would know better than I, but I think he also did a lot of the Briars, if I remember correctly, talking about Don. So he was, Canada's had so many good broadcasters, and Don was right up there. He was really, really good.
Yeah, him calling track and field, nothing better.
He was good at it.
And on that note, we're looking at Pierre McGuire sitting in his Mount Tremblant house, which is where we will be taking our show at some point, probably maybe during the Four Nations Cup, I was thinking.
Oh my gosh, I'm all in. Julie and Dan up here at Tremblant, where I grew up. My wife is from here. My in-laws are the local plumbers, and both our children were born here. So I've been here since 1965, long time.
What's the longest run at Mont Tremblant? Can we do a podcast from the top of the hill to the bottom?
No, unless we talk really fast. But, one of my childhood protege, not mentors, actually, I was his protege, was the great Ernie McCulloch, considered one of the top skiers in the first 50 years of the 1900s. So Ernie's buried right next to my dad up here at Tremblant, and there's a run named after him, and the other one would be the Duncan run from the top. There's so many. This is an amazing ski area. It's an amazing golf area, but it's just an amazingly great area if you love the outdoors. It's really special.
Yeah, we'll do pizza all the way down the hill so slowly so we can talk, and then we will finish up in the hot tub because that's what you do.
You know what, Julie? We can make that happen for you, kid. We can definitely do that.
Yeah, we're making it happen right now on the show. When you say it here, it means it's real. Okay, well, Pierre, thank you so much for joining us here today on what are we calling it?
McGuire Mondays.
McGuire Mondays, and I think it's McGuire Mondays. Manic McGuire Mondays Maple Leafs. Manic.
Too many words, Binksy. Just McGuire Monday.
McGuire Monday.
Thanks for watching Toronto Sports Rush on the Bet Rivers Network.